What happens when a civil engineer proves that a cheap bullet can stop a tank that cost millions to build? The command will call it a threat. But what happened at the test site silenced the tiger. You ever try to do the right thing and get slapped in the face for it? Not just a slap. I mean the kind that leaves a mark that tells everyone around. This fool thought the system wanted his help. Yeah, that was me. Spring 1944. Some damp-ass proving ground outside Kassel, Germany. Name's Klaus Gruber, engineer. Not a soldier, not a killer, just a man who knew what steel could do when you pushed it hard enough. I didn't carry a rifle, but I carried something just as dangerous, an idea. And let me tell you, that scared the hell out of the wrong people. I wasn't supposed to be there, not officially, but I saw something on a training range a few days earlier that wouldn't leave me alone. Some American Sherman took a hit. Not a clean shot, but it crumpled that thing from the inside out. Didn't even punch through the armor. No smoke, no fire, just some silence, like the tank gave up on breathing. I looked at the damage, ran my fingers over the twisted metal, and I knew this was different. This was mine. Not the shot, but the principle, the science behind it. I'd written about this exact kind of internal shockwave in my thesis. Nobody gave a damn back then. Just another civvy with theories. But now I had proof, and one chance to show it before they buried the whole thing under regulations and Red Cross reports. So I took the train, not because someone asked, because I had to. Carried one of my prototype shells in a steel case, wrapped like a lunchbox nobody should touch. It was heavy, the kind of heavy that makes your arms sore just thinking about what it could do to a tank. Now picture this. I'm standing in front of a reinforced test hangar, shirt collar smudged with graphite, hands black from the workbench, trying to look calm. Inside that building, they're prepping a Tiger tank for live fire trials. Big brass everywhere, engineers with clipboards, officers puffing cigars like it's their birthright. And here I come, civilian badge clipped crooked on my lapel, heart pounding like a jackhammer in my chest. Major Hagen looks me over, square jaw, buzz cut, eyes like dead river ice. "You're the one with the toy shell?" he asks. "No, sir," I said. "I'm the one with the solution." That was the wrong thing to say. See, in a place like this, facts don't matter. Rank does. You could hand them victory on a silver plate, but if it's not stamped by the right department, they'll toss it and call it dangerous. Hagen didn't even look at my calculations, didn't touch the prototype, just sneered. "We don't test fantasies," he said, "especially from civilians." I stood there like a damn fool, still holding the file. I could feel the heat of the test range behind the walls, could smell the oil and metal. I'd traveled 400 kilometers just to hear a man in a stiff uniform tell me to sit back down. I didn't, and that's when he found me. Paul, grease-stained overalls, busted fingernails, eyes like he'd seen 1,000 machines lie down and die. One of the techs, a nobody on paper, but smart, sharp. "I saw your schematics," he whispered. "You're not wrong. You're just early." He leaned in closer. "You want to see what it can really do? Come back tonight. No officers, no cameras, just truth." Now, I'm not stupid. I knew what that meant. One wrong move and I'm not just off the project, I'm blacklisted. Maybe worse. But hell, when you know you're right and no one's listening, what choice do you really have? We met at the back of the proving range. Midnight. Wind so cold it felt like betrayal. Paul had dragged out a busted Panzer III hull. one of the old shells they used for target practice. We set up the modified cannon, slotted my shell into place. No fanfare, no countdown. Just a breath, a nod, and a trigger pull. Boom! The blast rolled across the field like thunder dragged through broken glass. We ran to the wreck, boots crunching gravel, hearts in our throats. And what I saw? It was beautiful. No exit hole. No fire. But inside, devastation. Panels blown off, bolts bent. Interior like a bomb had gone off in the crew's teeth. It worked. It damn well worked. But then came the headlights. A jeep rolled up fast. Officer inside, face twisted like he'd bitten into a lemon. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I stepped forward, still holding the smoking casing. Testing a theory. He stepped out, grabbed the shell from my hand like it was poison. "You have no authorization, no clearance. You're done." He turned to Paul. "And you just signed your resignation." They took our IDs, wrote us up on the spot, and by sunrise, I was on a train heading back to Berlin. They didn't even let me grab my notes. Felt like I'd lost, like I was a joke. But then, halfway through the ride, a man sat across from me. Tall, leather coat, gloves too clean for travel. Looked like someone who knew which buttons to push, and when. "You were on the range last night," he said. "I saw it." I didn't answer. There are people who might want to hear more. People who don't wear medals they didn't earn. He slid me a card. Blank, except for an address and a date. Go there, or don't. But if you believe in what you built, don't let them bury it. Then he was gone. Just me, the countryside, and the sound of steel wheels dragging failure down the tracks. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss what came after they tried to silence him. They told me to sit down and shut up. I stood up and fired a shell. That should have been the end of it, right? You take a swing at the system, you get tossed out. Story over. Only it wasn't. Let me back it up a second. I'm standing in a Berlin train station at 6 a.m. with nothing but cold coffee in my gut and the weight of failure in my chest. In my coat pocket, a slip of paper with an address scribbled on it like it was a grocery list. No name, no instructions, just ink, paper, and a stranger's voice still ringing in my ears. People who don't wear medals they didn't earn. You ever hold on to something that don't look like much, but it hums in your hand? That paper felt like it had voltage running through it. I walked out into the street. Berlin was buzzing. Not with victory, but with panic in dress uniform. Officers barking orders to nobody. Supply trucks backed up for miles, and everywhere that stink of diesel and desperation. War might have been roaring at the edges of the Reich, but in the middle of it, bureaucracy was alive and well. The address took me to a building that didn't want to be found. No flag, no sign. Just a brass buzzer and a door thick enough to stop questions. A man let me in without a word. Led me down a hall that smelled like chalk and old metal. I don't even know what department it was. Something between weapons development and military secrets they didn't want on official record. And there they were, a room full of men in coats, not uniforms. Quiet types. Didn't salute, didn't brag, just nodded as I came in and said, "We saw what your shell did. Sit." They didn't ask for a resume, didn't make me prove I wasn't crazy. They already knew. That's when I met Kruger, head of some experimental division, though he looked more like an exhausted teacher than any kind of commander. Sharp eyes, soft voice. One of the first things he said to me was, "We don't have time for perfect. We need real." So I showed them everything. The schematics, The failed prototypes, the math that got me laughed out of the university. And then I said the one thing I knew they wouldn't like. But I need a test against a live Sherman, not a hunk of old metal. I want to see what it does when it counts. They didn't blink, just looked at each other. Come with us. Next thing I know, we're in a hangar at the edge of the city, cold and loud, with spotlights bouncing off the walls like prison yard floodlights. And in the center, like a prize bull waiting to be bled, was a captured M4 Sherman, American steel, real crew damage inside, still smelled like scorched rubber and fear. Last one we pulled from the Ardennes, Kruger said. Lost the loader, rest surrendered. They gave me the controls, just like that. No chain of command, no clipboard conference, just me, a shell, and that tank. I loaded it myself. Could feel the weight of the core as I slid it into place. Tungsten heart, slightly shorter casing, a design nobody in their right mind would approve unless they cared about results more than rules. We aimed for the side armor, standard weak point. But I didn't want penetration. I wanted consequence. Fired. The recoil punched like a train, even on the mount. The tank didn't explode, didn't burst into flames. It shuddered. The men stepped back. We approached together, like creeping up on a wounded animal, opened the hatch. Inside, twisted metal, black scorch marks, and silence. Not from destruction, but from force. A kind of violence that didn't show off, just ended things. They looked at me like I'd broken a code nobody told me existed. And then came the catch. One of the senior inspectors, a man I hadn't seen until now, slicked back hair, gloves on indoors, said, "Impressive, but this is not the direction High Command wants." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean effective?" He didn't like that. The Tiger program has priority. Funds, resources, strategic focus. Your shell undermines that. Undermines it. As in, works better. That's when I realized I wasn't fighting physics. I was fighting pride. Because if my shell could stop a Sherman faster, cheaper, and from longer range than a Tiger could, what did that say about their precious doctrine? What did it say about the medals already pinned, the promotions already granted, the factories already built? It said you were wrong. And nobody in charge wanted to be wrong in 1944, not with the war turning, not with cities crumbling. Kruger pulled me aside after the meeting, lit a cigarette with hands that shook just a little. "You're right," he said, "but timing is everything. They don't want to fix, they want to be proven right." I asked what happens now. "You'll be called in for more tests, but you'll be watched. And the moment you push too far, they'll shut it down." I left that building more angry than afraid, because for the first time, I saw it clear. War wasn't just fought with bullets. It was fought with egos. And the battlefield wasn't always dirt. Sometimes it was a boardroom table and a chalkboard full of lies. But I wasn't done. Not yet. This is the turning point. Everything you waited for, it's right here. Stay tuned to see how he shakes the ground under their feet. This story is not about armor and steel. It's about people who went against the system. If you're interested in the real dramas of World War II, hidden conflicts, and the struggle of ideas, subscribe so you don't miss any new stories. And write in the comments, why do you think one discovery can be declared a threat? Let me tell you something they don't print in the history books. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield isn't a gun or a tank. It's a truth that makes the wrong people look stupid. And, buddy, that's exactly what I was carrying. After that Sherman test, my life changed. Not in the way they write songs about. No banners, no promotions, Just the quiet tightening of invisible hands around my work. One day you're being asked to submit further documentation. Next day your prototype gets temporarily relocated for internal review. You're not fired. You're just processed, smiled at, forgotten, unless you push back. And I pushed. See, they couldn't deny the results. Not even the higher-ups who clung to the Tiger tanks like heirlooms from their grandfather's garage. My shell had done something no one expected. It made the armor itself the enemy. No explosives, no fancy tech. Just pressure, perfectly aimed, like a punch to the gut from inside the chest. Problem was, it was too good, too fast, too light, too cheap. And that's the kind of thing that makes boardroom generals nervous. They'd built a whole damn mythology around the Tiger, the symbol of German engineering, the unstoppable beast. They needed it to win, not just on the battlefield, but in propaganda reels, in posters, in speeches. The Tiger wasn't just a tank, it was a promise. And here I was, some civilian with dirty hands and clean math, quietly proving it wasn't necessary. Not exactly a welcome guest. 1 week after the test, I got called to a follow-up meeting. But not at the lab. This time, downtown, administrative building, 5th floor, hallway so quiet you could hear the carpets breathe. Waiting room with stiff chairs and a secretary who looked like she judged your shoes before your soul. "Mr. Gruber?" she said, without looking up. Inside. The office was large, too large. Desk the size of a dining table, windows that overlooked nothing. 3 men in chairs, 1 in uniform, 2 in suits. None of them smiled. "Your shell," said the man in uniform, "has drawn attention." He didn't mean applause. They asked questions, slow, careful, rehearsed. "Who helped you? Why did you pursue this line of research? Who else knows?" It wasn't curiosity. It was containment. Then one of the suits leaned in. Bald head. Pale knuckles. "You understand this can't be released without authorization." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I knew where this was going. What happens now? There will be a delay, a full review, possibly a recommendation to the Armaments Board. Translation: we're putting it in a drawer and hoping it dies there. I stood up. "With all due respect," I said, "you saw what it did. The tank wasn't disabled. It was neutralized. That's lives saved, battles shifted." The officer tapped his pen. "This war is about more than battles, Mr. Gruber. It's about stability, doctrine, coordination. A single shell that disrupts that, even successfully, is a liability." And there it was. I walked out of that building not as a hero, but as a risk. And things got worse. The next morning, my lab access was restricted. My notes moved to another department for verification. Paul, the tech who helped me fire that first shot, was reassigned to an outpost so remote they probably used candles instead of lights. I tried to complain, filed a report. It disappeared. No response, no records. It was like I'd imagined it all. And just when I thought they'd finished pushing me out, they assigned me a minder. Official title: liaison officer. Real role: watchdog. Young guy, polished boots, always polite, always there. "Just here to assist," he'd say. But I wasn't fooled. He didn't assist. He recorded. He watched me build a new shell, watched me run tests that never made it to the board, and every time I asked about progress, all I got was pending approval. That phrase became a brick wall. Cold, impenetrable, covered in fake smiles and stamped memos. Until one afternoon, Kruger pulled me aside. His face looked older, eyes sunken, voice tight. "You're not the first to be buried by success," he said, "and you won't be the last." I asked him what he meant. They don't want better. They want control. And in that moment, I saw it clearer than ever. My shell didn't fail. It succeeded in the wrong direction. Because it didn't glorify their machines. It didn't fit their narrative. It just worked. And in a system built on hierarchy, tradition, and dogma, that was the biggest sin of all. So I went home that night, sat in the dark, and laid it all out. My work, my ethics, my future. I wasn't angry. I was done waiting. If they weren't going to use it, I'd find someone who would. This is where everything breaks open. You've seen the pressure build. Now get ready to watch what happens when it explodes. I always thought the hard part would be proving it works. Turns out, the hard part is getting people to stop pretending it doesn't. After they boxed me in, surveillance, shutdowns, fake meetings, I should have folded. That's what they expected. A polite exit, maybe a quiet transfer to some forgettable office with a typewriter and a window that doesn't open. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't in this for a title. I was in it for the men, not the ones at the top. No, I mean the real ones. Tank crews out in the mud, pushing steel that overheats if you breathe on it wrong. Young mechanics patching hulls with parts meant for tractors. Gunners with eyes gone soft from staring through scopes that shake when you fire. They deserved better. And I had it. So I stopped waiting. With my access limited, I started working from memory. Rebuilt the shell design from scratch. Not in the lab, but in my own apartment. Spare parts smuggled in piece by piece. One component from a machinist friend, another from a junked anti-tank rifle. I knew it wouldn't last forever, but I didn't need forever. I needed one more shot. That's when Paul came back. I don't know how he found me. Maybe he never left. Maybe some people, when they believe in something, find their way back to the fight no matter how far they've been pushed. He showed up at my door like a ghost in coveralls. Same oil stains, same look in his eyes. "You still got that fire in you?" he asked. I didn't answer, just let him in. He laid out a plan, risky, loud, reckless, but solid. There was another Sherman, one not locked behind military doors. It had been pulled from a battlefield and left in a civilian scrapyard outside Leipzig. No markings, no guards, just rust and memory. Perfect target. We worked fast. 3 nights barely slept. Machined a fresh casing, reinforced the stabilizers. I even hand-polished the core. Every edge precise, every gram accounted for. Paul tuned the firing mount like he was rebuilding a piano. By the 4th night, we had it loaded in a crate marked pipes. Threw it onto a flatbed with a wink and a forged paper slip. And we drove. The road was cold, silent, just the sound of tires and the kind of fear you don't talk about. The kind that tightens your chest every time you pass a checkpoint, wondering if this is the moment everything unravels. We got to the site before dawn. The Sherman sat there like an old dog that had seen too much. Paint peeling, treads half gone, but the armor still solid, still enough to test the truth. We set up fast, no ceremony, just Paul, me, and one borrowed rig that could handle the recoil. "This is it," he said. "Yeah," I nodded. One way or another, we fired, and once again, no explosion, no fireball, just silence. The kind of silence that means everything inside is over. We opened the hatch. Same result. Walls blown inward, every control panel bent like a soda can. Nothing left that could have survived. It worked. Again. This time, we had witnesses, not the brass, not the officers. Real ones, workers from the yard. 2 off-duty engineers. A resistance contact I didn't even know Paul had invited. eyes wide, mouths shut. But I could see it. They knew. They saw the shell, saw why it mattered. And then the trucks came. Not police, not military. Some nameless unit in black coats with blank stares. Someone had talked. Someone had listened. Someone up high had decided that even one more test was one too many. We didn't resist. Wouldn't have helped. They took the rig, took the shell. Didn't arrest us, just disappeared us for 12 hours into a building with no name. Just enough time to let us know. We were being watched again. Closely. When they let us go, I expected a cell. A charge. Instead, silence. No trial. No accusations. Just doors that didn't open anymore. Phones that didn't ring. And people who stopped saying hello in the hallway. Paul vanished again. Whether by force or choice, I don't know. The project? Shuttered. My reports? Archived under some project code I wasn't allowed to read, but the idea, the truth, was already out. That second test hadn't gone unnoticed. Word spread, quiet and slow, like smoke in an old barn. A few techs reached out. Whispered questions, asked for notes. A mechanic from the front lines wrote to me through an old contact saying, "Whatever you built, it works." And I kept building. Not in labs, in mines, in trust. I knew they could silence a man, but they couldn't unsee what had already been seen. That was the moment I understood. They weren't afraid of failure. They were afraid of something that worked and didn't need them to bless it first. And that kind of fear, that's what changes wars. You think that was the end? Not even close. The real storm hadn't even begun. Stick around. What's coming next hits harder than any shell ever could. I always thought the hard part would be proving it works. Turns out, the hard part is getting people to stop pretending it doesn't. After they boxed me in, surveillance, shutdowns, fake meetings, I should have folded. That's what they expected. A polite exit, maybe a quiet transfer to some forgettable office with a typewriter and a window that doesn't open. But they underestimated one thing. I wasn't in this for a title. I was in it for the men, not the ones at the top. No, I mean the real ones. Tank crews out in the mud, pushing steel that overheats if you breathe on it wrong. Young mechanics patching hulls with parts meant for tractors. Gunners with eyes gone soft from staring through scopes that shake when you fire. They deserved better. And I had it, so I stopped waiting. With my access limited, I started working from memory. Rebuilt the shell design from scratch. Not in the lab, but in my own apartment. Spare parts smuggled in piece by piece. One component from a machinist friend, another from a junked anti-tank rifle. I knew it wouldn't last forever, but I didn't need forever. I needed one more shot. That's when Paul came back. I don't know how he found me. Maybe he never left. Maybe some people, when they believe in something, find their way back to the fight no matter how far they've been pushed. He showed up at my door like a ghost in coveralls. Same oil stains, same look in his eyes. "You still got that fire in you?" he asked. I didn't answer, just let him in. He laid out a plan. Risky, loud, reckless, but solid. There was another Sherman, one not locked behind military doors. It had been pulled from a battlefield and left in a civilian scrapyard outside Leipzig. No markings, no guards, just rust and memory. Perfect target. We worked fast. 3 nights, barely slept. Machined a fresh casing, reinforced the stabilizers. I even hand-polished the core. Every edge precise, every gram accounted for. Paul tuned the firing mount like he was rebuilding a piano. By the 4th night, we had it loaded in a crate marked pipes. Threw it onto a flatbed with a wink and a forged paper slip. And we drove. The road was cold, silent, just the sound of tires and the kind of fear you don't talk about, the kind that tightens your chest every time you pass a checkpoint, wondering if this is the moment everything unravels. We got to the site before dawn. The Sherman sat there like an old dog that had seen too much. Paint peeling, treads half gone, but the armor still solid, still enough to test the truth. We set up fast. No ceremony, just Paul, me, and one borrowed rig that could handle the recoil. "This is it," he said. "Yeah," I nodded. One way or another, we fired, and once again, no explosion, no fireball, just silence. The kind of silence that means everything inside is over. We opened the hatch. Same result, walls blown inward, every control panel bent like a soda can. Nothing left that could have survived. It worked. Again. This time, we had witnesses. Not the brass, not the officers, real ones, workers from the yard. 2 off-duty engineers. A resistance contact I didn't even know Paul had invited. Eyes wide, mouths shut. But I could see it. They knew. They saw the shell, saw why it mattered. And then the trucks came, not police, not military. Some nameless unit in black coats with blank stares. Someone had talked. Someone had listened. Someone up high had decided that even one more test was one too many. We didn't resist. Wouldn't have helped. They took the rig, took the shell, didn't arrest us, just disappeared us for 12 hours into a building with no name. Just enough time to let us know we were being watched again, closely. When they let us go, I expected a cell, a charge. Instead, silence. No trial, no accusations, just doors that didn't open anymore, phones that didn't ring, and people who stopped saying hello in the hallway. Paul vanished again. Whether by force or choice, I don't know. The project? Shuttered. My reports? Archived under some project code I wasn't allowed to read. But the idea, the truth, was already out. That second test hadn't gone unnoticed. Word spread, quiet and slow, like smoke in an old barn. A few techs reached out, whispered questions, asked for notes. A mechanic from the front lines wrote to me through an old contact saying, "Whatever you built, it works." And I kept building, not in labs, in mines, in trust. I knew they could silence a man, but they couldn't unsee what had already been seen. That was the moment I understood. They weren't afraid of failure. They were afraid of something that worked and didn't need them to bless it first. And that kind of fear, that's what changes wars. You think that was the end? Not even close. The real storm hadn't even begun. Stick around. What's coming next hits harder than any shell ever could. There comes a moment in every man's life when he stops asking for a seat at the table and builds his own damn table. That moment had come. By the time the 5th directive came down to cease all independent testing, I knew exactly what they were doing. Not punishing me, not prosecuting, just smothering. Smoother than a hammer, quieter than a jail cell, and 10 times more effective. And still, I didn't stop. See, when you've already been erased from their agenda, there's a strange freedom in that. No one checks your schedule. No one asks what you're working on. Because in their eyes, you're already done. But I wasn't done. Not even close. At night, I kept running my own calculations. During the day, I pulled favors. I made coffee for secretaries who knew where things moved. I sat with floor engineers at lunch, listening more than talking. And little by little, a map formed in my mind of where my shell had ended up and who had their hands on it now. Turns out, the project wasn't dead. It had just been relabeled. New name, new budget code, same math, same shell. But now it belonged to a team with no faces, no names, and absolutely no interest in sharing credit. They weren't building it to protect tank crews. They were building it to control a narrative. What I had created, something designed to stop tanks faster and cheaper, was now being twisted into a tool of power. A symbol, a lever, not for the war, for after. And they wanted me out of the way so the origin could be rewritten. Too bad for them. I knew where the bodies were buried. One morning I walked straight into a strategy meeting where I was not invited. Suits around the table. Diagrams on the wall. My design on the slides. They froze when they saw me. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just walked to the board and pointed. That equation, I said. It won't hold under recoil unless you modify the pressure delay in the second chamber. Silence. Then a cough. Then someone tried to smile. Mr. Gruber, one of the men said, we were under the impression you'd been reassigned. No, I said. You were under the hope that I'd been erased. I turned to leave. That was all I wanted. To remind them I wasn't gone. And I knew. Later that day, 2 things happened. 1, I got a message from Kruger. A short note. You lit a fuse. 2, I got a visitor. Not military, not civilian either. Some kind of in-between. A liaison to a liaison. Older man, sharp dresser. Spoke like he'd written speeches for people who never read them. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and said, You're becoming a problem, Mr. Gruber. I leaned back. Only to people who lie for a living. He gave me a long look. No anger, just calculation. We're not here to bury your work, he said. We're here to control its release. I laughed. Once. Dry. You mean to control me? He didn't deny it. Then he pulled out a file, slid it across the table. Inside, my personnel record. Not the one I'd seen, the real one, with surveillance logs, notes from every conversation, observations from men I thought were friends. You're careful, he said, but not careful enough. That's when I knew. They'd never intended to let it go public. Not with my name, not with my voice. If they had to use my design, they'd do it through someone else. Quietly, safely, wrapped in a lie that made them the genius and me the ghost. So I did something reckless. I took everything, my notes, my diagrams, even the prototype core I'd kept hidden, and I sent it. Not to the military, not to the board, to the front. Through a contact in the logistics chain, I passed it to a division commander I knew had no love for high command. Someone who still believed in winning the war, not playing politics. And you know what? He used it. Reports came back within weeks. Quiet ones. Not official, but enough. A Sherman knocked out without a trace of penetration. Crew evacuated, dazed but alive. The tank? Total loss. Same pattern, same outcome. It worked. Again. This time, not in theory. Not in a lab, but in the dirt with lives on the line. And suddenly, the silence cracked. Command started asking questions. Why was this shell showing up at the front? Why weren't they informed? Who authorized this? By the time they traced it back to me, it was too late. The genie was out. I wasn't a rogue engineer anymore. I was a problem with a paper trail. They couldn't jail me, not without confirming what I'd done. They couldn't kill the project. Too many eyes had seen it now. So instead, they negotiated, offered me a position, higher pay, a title, said all the right things, promised I could shape future innovation. I said no, because they didn't want me to shape anything. They wanted me to sign off on the version they'd already planned, the version that made them look brilliant and erased the men who actually bled to make it real. I walked away. Back to quiet rooms, back to late-night sketches, back to the edge where truth still matters more than permission. The shell still exists. In some form, somewhere. Maybe in a crate. Maybe in a blueprint. Maybe in a museum that doesn't know what it has. But if you ever hear a story about a tank that died with no holes, no fire, just silence, know this. It wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It wasn't approved. It was truth. And it came from a man who never asked for permission to protect people who'd never met him. The fire may have dimmed, but the fuse is still lit. And what that sparks next, that's a story for those brave enough to face what systems fear the most. Proof that didn't ask for permission. You ever watch a giant hesitate? I mean, really see it. That frozen second where a machine, a legend, a whole belief system hiccups because something didn't go the way it always does. I watched that happen, and I wasn't even supposed to be there. Let me rewind. By spring of 1945, the Tiger was still king of the hill, at least on paper. Thick armor, long-range cannon, reputation so big it practically roared before the engine did. Officers worshipped it like a holy relic. But on the field, that armor was turning into a coffin. Heavy, slow, always running out of fuel. A good shell in the right place could crack it like an egg. Problem was, nobody had that shell. Except I did. Unofficially. Quietly. Without endorsement. And now, it was about to be seen by people who still thought the Tiger couldn't bleed. The field test wasn't meant for public eyes. Not officially. But word spreads, even when they try to bury it in obscure directives and locked memos. There was a whisper going around command. The new shell's moving. Some said it was Allied tech. Others called it black market nonsense. But a few knew the truth. So when I got the call from a major I barely knew, telling me to come observe a private comparative trial, I knew exactly what it was. They were lining up the Tiger, and next to it, a captured Sherman, repaired, crewless, steel nerves and history behind every dent. They were going to pit the classic German shell against mine. Live. I showed up an hour early. The range was out past the forest. One of those quiet stretches of ground where wind carries more than sound. Officers were already gathering. Clipboards, scarves, that stiff kind of silence where no one wants to admit they're curious. Kruger was there, too, leaning on a jeep, cigarette in hand, eyes sharp. You know they want it to fail, he said. They want a dud. Then they should have built one, I told him. We walked toward the line. My shell, the most recent iteration, had been modified by field engineers under quiet orders. They'd tweak the core, balance the load. Not for spectacle, for truth. First shot was theirs. Standard AP round from the Tiger. Loud. Beautiful. Left a black hole through the Sherman side big enough to climb through. Officers nodded, satisfied. It was what they expected. Then came mine. No fanfare, just Paul's old mount, rigged to handle the recoil, no announcer, no speech, just the wind, the silence, and a pull of the trigger. Boom, not louder, not brighter, just different. The Sherman didn't shatter. It shuddered, like something inside had shifted too fast. We walked up, opened the hatch, and there it was. No hole, no burn. But inside, every gauge popped, internal frame twisted, crew bench collapsed inward like it had exhaled its last breath. One of the officers turned white. Was it primed? Yes, I said, and no breach. Nope. I heard it then, the thing no one wanted to say but couldn't ignore. The Tiger didn't do that. One of the younger engineers started whispering numbers. Pressure readings, velocity. He knew what this meant. That's when the commander, the one overseeing the test, stepped forward. Clean boots, medals that looked like they'd never seen dirt. He looked at both tanks, then at me, and he blinked, that's all. One slow blink. But I knew that was the crack. He turned to the crowd and said, "Preliminary data will be reviewed. This demonstration is inconclusive." Inconclusive. After watching a tank die without a scratch on the outside. That's when I realized. It wasn't about what the shell could do. It was about what it proved. That the Tiger wasn't untouchable. That a lighter weapon, from a civilian no less, could match or surpass the crown jewel of German armor. That was dangerous. Because if this truth got out, everything would shift. Manufacturing priorities, supply chains, frontline strategies, even morale. The image of the Tiger was part of the war effort, and now a shell had made it blink. They packed up fast after that. I tried to follow up, asked for the raw footage, the readings, the paperwork. Got the same answer every time. Classified. Within a week, my access was pulled again. Quietly. No incident. Just doors that didn't open. But I wasn't alone. 2 days later, I got a package. No return address inside. A single roll of film. Unlabeled, uncut. I watched it, frame by frame. The test, the blast, the silence. The Sherman, dead without a scar. The faces of men who didn't know whether to salute or run. Truth caught on camera. I don't know who sent it. Maybe one of the techs. Maybe Kruger. Doesn't matter. What mattered was what came next. Because from that day forward, every time a Tiger stalled in the mud, every time a crew watched an enemy shell knock without entering, someone remembered that other shot. The one that didn't roar, the one that worked. They never gave me credit, never wrote it in the records. But the shell got whispered into doctrine, modified, cloned, hidden behind new names. It lived. Not because they wanted it to, because it refused to die. And when the war ended and the files were burned and the medals were pinned on the wrong people, I kept one thing, that film, because systems forget. But Steel remembers. Some truths don't need banners or parades, just a target, a witness, and enough force to shake the silence. That's how history shifts. Not with noise, but with proof that refuses to go away.